Dave and Son. Their neighbors got came by the property.
So you have now it's. Yeah, yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes, yeah. Makes sense to have to go. No. No,
Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all who are present here today, in particular the members of our presenters who are present, our guests, and I will introduce in a moment, and all of those staff of the Diocesan Center who are with us, and also all of our students in our high schools who will either be seeing this now with us virtually or who will be viewing this later on because of the inclement weather this week. We have a Catholic Schools Week is not quite as we had planned it, but it is a moment for all of us together today, virtually at this moment, and hopefully in the days and weeks ahead as well, as we come together on this very solemn occasion for Holocaust Remembrance Day. As we gather January 27th, we call to mind January 27th, 1945, when the Russian, the Soviet army liberated the death camp at Auschwitz. It's a somber moment to recall that reality, the horror of the Holocaust. And for us as Catholics, it's an extremely important remembrance, as we are called always to keep that in mind, to keep in mind how evil anti-Semitism is and the grave form that it took during that horrific period of time from 1933 until 1945. The unimaginable occurred. In all of our schools today, I ask that this day be marked, and it is important that it is during Catholic Schools Week because it is a very important part of our Catholic faith. Call that to mind. I am reminded of this, of course, by an incident which occurred in our diocese back in October, and related to a display in a Halloween parade. And it highlights the fact that we as Catholics and people of all people of goodwill need to be educated, constantly aware, really of, as Christians particularly, the relationship, the close bond, theologically, spiritually, that we as Christians have with the Jewish people. Also to recognize that, again, sin and evil of anti-Semitism, and also to understand what happened, the Holocaust. And so we remember, and call to mind, yes, in a somber way, but also with open hearts and minds to understand so that we may be formed by what we recall and how we interact. We are not defined by hatred as human beings. We are called to live as people in the image and likeness of God, who is love. As Christians, we believe that so much. And so it is very important for us to call to mind this day and to, through our actions, repudiate any form of anti-Semitism. You know, the Second Vatican Council, right as it was concluding in October of 1965, under the leadership of Pope St. Paul VI, issued a document. We recalled the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate back in October of last year. Nostra Aetate was the church's call to respect all people of non-Christian religions, but particularly emphasize the close relationship and the importance of our relationship with the Jewish people. I quote from the document Nostra Aetate: "Since the spiritual patrimony common to Christians and Jews is thus so great, this sacred synod wants to foster and recommend the mutual understanding and respect, which is the fruit, above all, of biblical and theological studies, as well as fraternal dialogue. Furthermore, in her rejection of every persecution against any man, the Church, mindful of the patrimony she shares with the Jewish people, and moved not by political reasons, but by the gospel's spiritual love, decries hatred, persecutions, displays of anti-Semitism directed against Jews at any time and by anyone. We cannot truly call on God, the Father of all, if we refuse to treat in a brotherly way any man or woman created as we are in the image and likeness of God. Man's relation to God the Father and his relation to others as brothers and sisters are linked so together that Scripture says, he who does not love does not know God. No foundation, therefore, remains for any theory or practice that leads to discrimination between men and women, people, so far as their human dignity and the rights flowing from it are concerned. The teaching authority of the Church, the highest authority, the Second Vatican Council, repudiating anti-Semitism in a very timely document, which we need to call to mind, especially in a time when it seems that hatred is still part of our interaction, are part of our reality. So we as Christians then, as Catholics in particular, seek to be formed in that respect for the dignity of every person, and to continue to pray for one another and pray for peace in our world. Pope St. John Paul II acknowledged, really for the first time, Catholic involvement in the persecution of the Jewish people. He noted that, quote, there was a burden of guilt that Christians bore, quote, for the murder of the Jewish people. He repeatedly condemned anti-Semitism as sinful and opposed the very spirit of Christianity, opposed to the very spirit of Christianity. In the year 2000, he made a historic visit to Jerusalem, where he honored the victims of the Holocaust with a historic visit to Yad Vashem and prayed at the Western Wall, the holiest site in Judaism. And like other devout visitors, he placed a prayer in the crevice of the wall. These were the words of Pope St. John Paul II's prayer at the wall in Jerusalem. God of our fathers, you chose Abraham and his descendants to bring your name to the nations. We are saddened by the behavior of those who, in the course of history, have caused these children of yours to suffer. And asking your forgiveness, we commit ourselves to genuine brotherhood with the people of the covenant. Dear brothers and sisters, and before turning it over to our panel members, I'd like to once again welcome them and introduce them. Our first speaker will be Andrew Goretzky, who is the Executive Director of the, Senior Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League, Philadelphia office serving Eastern Pennsylvania, Southern New Jersey, and Delaware. He's going to be our first speaker. He'll be followed by Elaine Culbertson, who is the co-chair of the Consortium of Holocaust Educators in Greater Philadelphia. Welcome, Elaine. Also present with us today and will be speaking with us and leading us in prayer, Rabbi Ariana Kaptauber, who is the rabbi from here in Harrisburg of Beth El Temple. Present also with us is Randy Boyette, Senior Associate Regional Director for the Anti-Defamation League, and also Hank Butler, who is Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Jewish Coalition here in Harrisburg. So very, very grateful for the presence of our presenters today and those who are with them, and presence for all of those diocesan staff members who are with us, as well as those who are joining us virtually. I will begin then with a prayer before introducing our first presenter. I can find the page. Let us remember that we are always and everywhere in the holy presence of God. Eternal God, on this day, we pause in solemn remembrance. We honor the millions of lives stolen, men, women, and children, whose voices were silenced by hatred and cruelty. Hold their memories in the light of your eternal love. May their stories never fade from our hearts, and may their courage inspire us to stand against injustice in every form. Comfort the survivors and their families, and grant us the strength to be witnesses to truth, so that such darkness may never again take root in our world. Let peace, compassion, and human dignity prevail, now and for all generations to come. Amen. Welcome, Andrew Goretzky, who is again the Senior Director of the Anti-Defamation League for Central, Eastern part of our country. So Andrew, welcome. Thank you.
And thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you for having us here today. As we remember the Holocaust, today I'm going to be talking about modern-day anti-Semitism. So again, my name is Andrew Goretzky, Senior Regional Director for the Anti-Defamation League's Philadelphia office, and you'll give me one moment as I try to make sure my presentation gets up on the screen. Sorry. Can't minimize that. Look at that. Making the magic work. So again, my name is Andrew Goretzky. I'm the Senior Regional Director for the ADL Philadelphia office. In my role, I oversee the work that we do in Eastern Pennsylvania, Southern New Jersey, and Delaware. I came to ADL following what was a 23-year career in higher education administration. My doctorate's in higher education administration from George Washington University. My research area is student engagement and mobile technology, so I have particular interest in the proliferation of hate in online spaces, and we'll be talking a little bit about that today. And there are three reasons I talked about during my interview why I came to ADL. One of those is the Unite the Right rally at UVA, which I will talk about during the presentation. The next is the Tree of Life massacre that occurred in Pittsburgh, which I will also talk about during the presentation. The one that I will be spending a little less time on today was my concern over rising anti-Semitism that I had been seeing on campuses, and the first time I had experienced it was in my professional career in 2005. And so those are the things that I spoke about as to the reasons why I came to ADL as we talk about anti-Semitism today. Yes, absolutely. Sorry, we need to make sure the screen is getting shared on the Zoom. Excellent. Sorry about that. So a little bit about ADL. We are a national anti-hate organization founded in 1913 with the mission to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment to all, because our founders knew then what we know now. You can't fight one form of hate and bigotry without fighting all forms of hate and bigotry. And our hope is for a world where no group or individual suffers from bias, discrimination, or hate. And why are we talking about anti-Semitism and why now? Obviously, today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, but we talk about anti-Semitism because we need to look at it as any other form of hatred, but also in its unique ways. Because we're living in a time of increasing and sometimes deadly anti-Semitism here in the US and abroad, because Jewish people are feeling increasingly unsafe and unwelcome, and because anti-Semitism is becoming normalized. And so it's really important that we acknowledge the fact that we don't know what we don't know, and that's okay. Ignorance is not a bad word as long as we are doing what we can to learn and to understand. And a story I like to share about this is actually something that I experienced my freshman year of college. Back in the early 90s, going to age myself there, I went to college in SUNY Buffalo. I grew up in Staten Island. It was the furthest away from home, but still in state. And so going to school in Buffalo, I met this person who was from rural New York. And in this meeting with him, he and I became friends. We hung out the first week. We hung out the second week. And by the third week, he looked at me and he said, "Hey, do you want to get together and hang out again this weekend?" And my response to him was, "I can't. I'm going home for Rosh Hashanah." And he looked at me. He said, "Rosh Hashanah, what's that?" He had never met a Jewish person before. He had never heard of Rosh Hashanah. For those of you who don't know what Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year. And so I said, "It's the Jewish New Year." And he looked at me dumbfounded. And he said, "You're Jewish?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You can't be." I said, "No, I'm pretty sure." He goes, "It's impossible." I said, "Nah, my mom made me go to Hebrew school. I got bar mitzvahed. I went through all this other stuff that I didn't love doing as a kid, but I went ahead and I did it. I'm pretty sure I'm Jewish." And he looked at me very seriously and very straight-faced and said, "But Andrew, you don't have horns." So he grew up in a rural town, never meeting a Jewish person, where somebody said to him at a young age that Jews wear yarmulkes or hats because we're covering up our demon horns. This is an age-old, millennial-long trope that's related to the deicide trope, which is the belief that Jews are the ones who killed Jesus, which is why the demon horn is the piece that's there. And he just ingrained that. Is that an anti-Semitic comment? Absolutely. Is he an anti-Semite? No, we're still friendly to this day. He didn't know, he didn't understand, and we don't know what we don't know, and that's okay, as long as we are open to understanding and realize that a lot of anti-Semitism and the reason that it persists is it is age-old, multi-millennial long tropes and conspiracy theories, which I'm going to talk a little bit about today as we're going through the presentation. And so in defining the anti-Semitism, the Holocaust is what we are commemorating today, but anti-Semitism, as I've mentioned, is much older than the Holocaust, and anti-Semitism did not end with the Holocaust. Present reality, incidents are on the rise today. At ADL, because I think it's important that we all have common language, we use what's called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, that it's a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews, and it can be rhetorical or physical manifestations of anti-Semitism. And in thinking about this, as I mentioned, there's stereotypes or tropes. So these are oversimplified generalizations about a person or a group of people without regard for individual differences. And tropes, which is a word I will use, is common or recurring patterns, messages or devices that repeat throughout history. This next slide shows you some graphics of what are very typical tropes about Jews and Jewish people. The idea that Jews have this inordinate amount of control. If we had such a level of control, in the media and things like that, I'd get more op-eds in the Inquirer. We would get a lot more things in news that we would want. But clearly this isn't the case, but there is this false trope of power and control. This first graphic, we often see it portrayed in graphics as puppeteering. We see this racist caricature of a Jewish person holding up puppets of Obama and Biden when Obama was president. The next one is a disloyalty. The idea that Jews are going to be more loyal to somewhere else than where they live. This is a common trope that has existed through millennia, that existed in ancient Roman times, that exists through today. This graphic is showing a racist caricature of a Jewish person who this graphic is talking about money going to Israel rather than to poverty programs. Now, politically, you may have a viewpoint about where money should be given, but when you're blaming the fact that poverty programs aren't funded because of money going to Israel, this crosses the line to being anti-Semitic because it's impacting the belief that it's only the Jewish reason why we are there. Greed is another component here. This is a racist caricature of a Jewish person during coronavirus. Now, to be very clear, Asian Americans received the brunt of hate during coronavirus and COVID, but there were a lot of pieces around Jewish people as it related to greed and profiting off COVID. And this last one is, again, the idea that Jews killed Jesus Christ as a people. And you see here a devil with horns. So I used this graphic to demonstrate in talking about perpetuation of tropes and what that person believed when I was in college. The Unite the Right rally is in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017. Because I worked in higher ed, I did a lot of work in places where it related to protests near campuses. This one, they were chanting, "Jews will not replace us." This was about Confederate statues coming down. And I remember asking, what does this have to do with Jews will not replace us? And in so doing, they would talk about the fact that the Great Replacement Conspiracy theory, the idea that white America is being replaced by Black and brown people, and that there's this all-powerful cadre of Jews spearheading it. That, again, is a power trope. This is, again, is another picture of the scariness of the Unite the Right rally as people marched through UVA with torches at that time, chanting this. And that led to the Tree of Life massacre. We all know of Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, where an individual came and shot in a synagogue during Sabbath on Saturday. And in that, the reason that he chose a synagogue was he believed in that Great Replacement Conspiracy theory, which is an evolution of power trope. And he chose a synagogue to shoot up because he wanted to target Jews who he believed were doing this. The shooter who shot a Tops supermarket in Buffalo, which is where I went to college, chose that venue because he was targeting a primarily Black community. But again, it's that same power trope and Great Replacement Conspiracy theory. We also see a lot of Holocaust denial and distortion with people using Jewish stars and talking about vaccination requirements at the time. And we see swastikas and anti-Zionism as a component here that comes into modern day anti-Semitism. As far as anti-Semitic incidents, and I know I'm almost close on time here, so I want to make sure I go through. We've seen a large number. ADL's audit collects data nationally. This is the rise in incidents that we've seen since 2015 to 2024, and these are incidents of harassment, vandalism, and assault. States with the highest, Pennsylvania was fourth in the United States in 2024 with 465 incidents. The biggest concerning piece is we had 12 instances of assault. The year before, we had 5. The year before, when it was 5, all of them happened in K through 12 age student groups. And so this is one piece where we're concerned, and I want to share a very quick story to understand how this impacts in a school setting. I had a young lady who joined and wanted to join an environmentally focused group. She was wearing her Jewish star going in, and immediately upon entering, people started grilling her on what her perceptions were of Israel and whether she supported Israel as a Jewish state. And then they told her she couldn't be part of that club because of that. So when wearing her Jewish star, she wasn't able to be part of this club. This is the type of incident we see. And when we start targeting individuals because of somewhere that they're wearing a Jewish star or an impact of what they're doing, that's where we're creating spaces of lack of belonging. And so what can you do to push back on anti-Semitism and hate? First, learn it and name it when you see it. I went very briefly over this. I can go do hour-long presentations on the history of anti-Semitic tropes and what happens there. Don't normalize it. This is where when we make jokes, they're not just jokes. They perpetuate the stereotypes that occur. Be an upstander in safe ways. So when you can intervene, please intervene safely. Create spaces for belonging, so ensuring that individuals, regardless of their identity, feel like they belong in that space. Challenge conspiracy theories when you see them and hear them, and practice empathy and curiosity. Understand where the person is coming from and ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. If that friend of mine, first year of college, didn't feel comfortable asking me questions, and if I didn't respond positively, we'd be in a very different place, him and I, today. So that's what I'd ask you to do, and I appreciate the time today. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Very enlightening, albeit unsettling presentation, but thank you so much for that. And that point about you don't know what you don't know and how important it is for us to know and then to be aware. So thank you. Our next presenter, very happy to welcome Elaine Culbertson, who is co-chair of the Consortium of Holocaust Educators of Greater Philadelphia, with an extensive background in education. Most especially, she speaks from her own personal experience, as your dear mother was a survivor of the Holocaust, as she wrote in her book, which she very gratefully I'm grateful to receive a copy of this today, Mama Lay, A Legacy of Loss and Love. Elaine, please share your story, and we're very grateful to have you present today.
I'm not even going to pretend. Start from the beginning. Thank you. Thank you all for coming here. I want to talk about the Holocaust through the lens that is a personal one rather than a global perspective. And when I say a personal one, I am the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors, born 2 months after they came to America, several years after the end of World War II. So what am I doing to make this move? This is what happens when you... Oh, the clicker. You mean right in front of me? Okay. Okay. When I talk about the Holocaust, I want to emphasize that it was not an accident in history. It was intentional. And this particular statement, it happened because individuals, organizations, and governments made choices that legalized discrimination, fostering prejudice and hatred, and ultimately leading to the mass murder of 6 million Jewish people. Now, we always want to talk about other victims as well, but because I am a Jewish person from a Jewish family, I'm going to focus primarily on them. When I work with people, I have to explain that the Holocaust and World War II are not the same thing. World War II was Nazi Germany's kind of quest for more land, more resources, and the Holocaust was its war against the Jewish people. World War II began on September 1st, 1939, with the invasion of Poland, but the Holocaust, if you want to have a date, actually began in 1933 with the election of Hitler as Chancellor of Germany, and then the subsequent passage of many anti-Jewish laws. So if you hark back to where I said it's the legalization of discrimination, that is where it started. So why do we study about the Holocaust? Why is it important? Why do we have an International Remembrance Day? We are charged to remember, to prevent, to protect the vulnerable, to bring war criminals to justice, to talk truth to power, and to educate. And let me tell you, I'm having a slight fit here as a former English teacher at the way these words have ended up being divided on the screen. Never, I swear, never. So geography determined a lot about what happened to people during the Holocaust. When I say it started in Germany and then I say the war started in Poland, I will tell you that the Holocaust came to Poland officially on September 1st, 1939. But it did not come to Hungary, for example, until 1944. It came to France in 1940, 1941. What I am equating here with the Holocaust is the invasion of Germany into these other countries and the legalization there of all of the discrimination that had already started and was happening in Germany. I'm going to talk about someone from Poland. So 1939 is going to be pivotal. Lots of people say, so if they saw it starting in Germany in 1933 and they knew it was primarily the Jews as target, why didn't they just leave? Well, we're watching some things nowadays that we don't like. Are you ready to leave? Is it so easy to pick up and go somewhere else? Is there someplace else that would accept you, where you would feel comfortable, where you might have a job, be able to raise your family, where you think your children would be safe? I want you to think of all of that when I tell you the story of my mother. And of course, how easy was it to leave? What did you need to have? Not only a place to go, but the paperwork. And you needed to secure that when you got there, you would have a way of supporting yourself, somewhere to live. So leaving, while it sounds like a possibility, was really not for most people a real chance. I used to hear this all of the time. Why didn't the Jews fight back? We live in a world where if you don't have a gun, you probably know somebody who does. If you have a means of escape, like a car, you could have gotten away from what is coming towards you. The Jews fought back in any way they could. They fought back in the ghettos, in the camps, and in the forests, but they didn't have arms. Most Jews were not trained in using military weapons, and they were against an army, an insurmountable army. So this is like you and me deciding we're going to do something, but somebody comes in completely trained and armed. We don't stand a chance. I also want to take a moment to talk about forms of resistance. We think of resistance only as armed resistance, but resistance can take many, many forms. And I particularly included this picture of a rabbi teaching children in the ghetto, because what this person is doing is helping these children maintain their Jewish identity, even at the risk of their lives, by studying the traditional text and by believing that there would be a future for them, that teaching them, perhaps training them for a bar mitzvah, meant that they might live long enough to have it. So instilling hope that there might be a future. This poem, called to resist is on the wall at the Ghetto Fighters House, which is a kibbutz in Israel. It was started by those who had survived the Warsaw Ghetto. I'm going to take a moment to read it to you. To smuggle a loaf of bread was to resist. To teach in secret was to resist. To gather information and distribute an underground newsletter was to resist. To cry out warning and shatter illusions was to resist. To rescue a Torah scroll was to resist. To forge documents was to resist. To smuggle people across borders was to resist. To chronicle events and conceal records was to resist. To extend a helping hand to those in need was to resist. To dare to speak out at the risk of one's life was to resist. To stand empty-handed against the killers was to resist. To reach the besieged, smuggling weapons and commands was to resist. To take up arms in streets, mountains, and forests was to resist. To rebel in death camps was to resist. To rise up in the ghettos amid crumbling walls in the most desperate revolt humanity has ever known. The notion of collective responsibility was one of the things that held people back from doing more outrageous things. The idea that as an individual, you have a moral obligation to your family and to your community. If you did resist in some way, you had in the back of your mind that your resistance might cause the death of someone else or many someones, because the Nazis had no value for their enemies and would think nothing of annihilating a family, an entire community, just to prove and just to keep people from trying to resist. I want to get personal. We Americans have very little idea of geography. In fact, many of us don't even know that the United States is a country and not a city. And I say this advisedly. Remember, I was a teacher for many years. So I'm pointing out a small town in what was then Poland called Przani. This is where my mother was from. And I used a map that shows Europe in 1941-42 to show you that things were changing. The borders were shifting. And my mother's small town was still part of Poland, but it was under German occupation by the end of 1941. It had originally been under Russian occupation, and before that, in a free Poland. So within 3 years, it had changed from a free state to a communist state to a Nazi state. A picture of the town, the building with the white arches next to the church. The building with the white arches is the town market where the farmers would bring food on Thursdays to sell. And I chose this particular building because it's a brick building. And I think that was rare. Most of the buildings were wood with kind of plaster over them. There's also carts, horses, and cars. Let me tell you that when I asked my mother, well, did your family have a car? After she was done laughing, she said, no, we really didn't need a car. We had everything we needed in the town. She said, but when the Nazis came to get us, we needed to get to the train, and we went by horse-drawn sled. So talk about change in the world. Within that small amount of time, those 3 years that I talked about, not only were there trains and cars and trucks and everything like that, but they went to the train in a horse-drawn sled. This is a picture of my mom. My mom is the little one. Her name was Dora. I don't know why they're wearing Santa Claus suits. Okay. When I asked my mother that, she told me it was because they were a very well-to-do family. This is real fur. Okay. My mother's older sister was named Franya. My mother was Dora. This picture exists because it was sent to America, to my grandmother's brothers in America. They had left Poland looking for a better life. They were both unmarried. My grandmother was already married with children, not so easy to go anywhere. My mother came from a well-to-do family. My grandfather owned a bakery. My grandmother worked as a cashier part-time in the bakery. My grandfather never went to the ovens. This was the phrase that I heard in our family. He was an entrepreneur, okay? They went to Polish public school, but they had Hebrew and Yiddish tutors after school. When the war broke out in 1939, my mother was 13 years old. She had just started learning French, taking piano lessons, and had just come back from summer camp. So she would have said, I had a good life. Things were about to change. This is a picture of the ghetto in her town, a map that was drawn. And you will notice the 3 gates, the green, are the entrances to the ghetto. Previously, my mother and her family had lived in a private home. Suddenly, their home was taken away, and they had to move into the ghetto with other relatives in their family. At the time that they lived there were 11 people in the apartment. It was a 1-bedroom apartment. Still, my grandfather always said, while we are together, this is what is important. Whatever happens to one of us will happen to all of us. I chose the picture of the people with the hats on their backs to show what it meant to move into the ghetto. You took whatever you could and you left everything else. In the beginning of 1943, it was determined that the sort of getting rid of process was not moving fast enough. And so my mother's town was liquidated. And I'm using Nazi speak here so that you can hear these words. Liquidated, meaning that the Jews were taken away. This is not the train in my mother's town. I'm just showing you what it looked like, the ramp up into the cattle car. I'm going to let my mother tell you this part of her story. There's a couple of clips here from her interview with the Shoah Foundation. I'm hoping, how are we going to make this work? Can I just touch it or stay with me always? No, go back.
My father at that time was, I wouldn't say much, but maybe he's 39, maybe he's 38 years old. Very tall, nice guy. And everybody said to him, Itzhak, what are you standing? Take a few and jump out. If they kill us all, is it going to be all right already? So my father looked at us all. And I don't know, my father would have never done anything like this, never. And he took out something from his pocket, like, I don't even know what it was, silver dollars or golden dollars or whatever it was. And he gave it to me and my sister. And he said, I'm going to jump out. So remember, if we survive, we're going to come back to the village where Vali lives. Vali was the main worker that went to the oven. He was like our confidant. He was everything. Like he was just like a person that lived with us for many, many, many years together. And I said, Daddy, where are you going to go? Me and my sister and Mother and the boy, but you know, at that time, I guess you cannot say what happens into your head. They jumped out. How they jumped out, I will never, never know. And right away, you heard shooting. They jumped out 4 people. And you know, like the windows in those train are narrow, very narrow. How he went through, I will never know. And the train goes so fast, so fast. And we heard shooting. But to tell you the truth, 2 people had survived. They jumped on both sides of the train. 2 people were killed and 2 people survived. And the people that survived, I saw them. And I said, well, where did my papa jump? He said he jumped from the same train at the same time from the other side. And he got killed probably. But still, you know, my mind and everything, my whole life in Birkenau, in Auschwitz, in Ravensbrück, I still had that little one dream that maybe he's alive. And that's what kept me going.
That one dream was extraordinarily important to her because she was with her sister, her mother, and the 2 younger children. There was a younger brother and a baby sister, had been taken on an earlier transport. I want to show you what happened. My mother was in PJ 104. It departed. Now remember, this is the European way of looking at it. February 1st, 1943, and it arrived in Auschwitz on February 2nd, 1943. There were 1,265 people in the train. There were 95 children up to the age of 10 years. There were 399 adults, 294 were men, 105 were women. Taken directly to the gas chamber, 866 of them. My mother and her sister survived. But when they got to Auschwitz and they asked, where is our mother? Inmates in the camp pointed to the smoke coming out of the crematoria. So here it is very, very clearly. Only 254 men and 105 women were checked into the camp, and my mother was among them. She was born in 1926. She had just turned 17 in December of 1942. Why Auschwitz? Why this place? This is a place where the train tracks of different gauges actually met. So the trains that came from the east, from Russia, could go there, and the trains that came from the west, from France, etc., could also go there and fit onto the train tracks. German efficiency. You may have seen this particular sign. You'll notice that the B is upside down. That's the way it was made. Arbeit macht frei. Work will set you free. It's an ironic sign. There was no intention of setting anyone free. The reality was that if you were allowed to work, it was intended to kill you. The gates into the part of the camp that's called Birkenau, this is where most of the Jews were. And then the geography of what Auschwitz looked like. And remember, my mother's name is Dora, so I put an arrow to where her actual barracks was. So the pink were the women's blocks. And my mother came in on what is called the Judenramp, at the bottom right. By the time the Russian soldiers came to Auschwitz on January 27th, the Nazis had already exploded the crematoria in order to cover the evidence of what had happened there. This is what it looked like. This is where the women slept. My mother told me that you always wanted to be on the top bunk if you could, but you didn't have it to yourself. Usually it was between 3 and 5 people. No blanket. When one person turned, everybody turned. The reason you wanted to be on the top, and forgive me for saying this, is that the diarrhea was so constant that if you were below, it was raining down on you. You couldn't just leave to go to the bathroom. There were times when your barracks or your group could go. I'm going to show you a little segment from Sophie's Choice that best illustrates what it looked like. And my mother always told me this was the best illustration that she had ever seen.
The day they took me to work for Hess, I was forced to walk past block 25. That is where they took the prisoners that was selected for extermination. The people there were made to stand for sometimes days. They was naked and they had no water. And their hands reach out from the bars and cry and plead.
So you see Meryl Streep depicting the life of a survivor walking through this mud. It was either mud or frozen mud all of the time. Actually, in the summer, inmates were infected with malaria. Malaria in Poland. This will just give you an idea of how filthy it was, how impossible it was to keep clean, how weak people were in terms of being able to contract that kind of disease. The people reaching out of the windows asking for help, the people hanging, being hung, and everybody just kind of going about their business, because after a while, you become somewhat inured to death. At one point, my mother and her sister were taken to a quarry to work with quarry rocks. They knew as much about working in a quarry as you and I do. This is the story of where my mother loses her sister. Her sister was charged with bringing in the camp soup kettle. If you worked outside of the actual campground, you were entitled to a lunch. But my mother will tell the story.
And this particular day started out right away with a train. And like this, sometimes they used to sit down somewhere and like talk. And like we had a little time for ourselves, to stand and relax a little bit. This time it was just impossible. From far away, they kept on saying, "We see that you are not working. We see that you are not working." And the girls were thin, dressed very poorly, very thin. The weather was cold. The wooden shoes, without socks, without stockings, without anything. It was an awful day. And at 12 o'clock, they brought down the soup they used to bring in the big barrels. And we worked like in a valley. And the soup they used to live on top where they go through and they left there the two big, what do you call it? It's like they looked like garbage cans with the soup, but they were closed up, it should. And he picked out a few girls to go out and bring the soup down. And of course, he picked out my sister and another few girls. And the drop was very slippery because it rained and it snowed and everything. and they like fell with that thing together, and the hot soup started spilling on them, and they were burning. By the time they came down, they were burned, their faces, their hands, everything, and there was no soup in the barrels anyway. So he took the two girls, my sister and the other girl, and he said, "Look what you did. They won't have any soup till 9 o'clock this evening." And he said, "Well, we have to do something about it." And he took out the rifle, and with the butt of the rifle, he killed them both. And then he looked at them. He was not more than 17 years old. And he looked at them and he said, "You know what? She is so young and so beautiful. She was not ready to die yet." He said it in German. So another girl understood better, said, "Well, why did you do it?" He said, "Well, if I'm not going to do it, somebody else will do it. What's the difference? None of you will go out of here alive. You will be all dead. This is the plan. This cleaning up and that all doing things is just for a while it lasts. Later on, when there is no other work to be done, you all will be killed."
When this happened, my mother lost all hope. She knew that her mother and the two younger children had been killed the day they arrived in Auschwitz. Now her sister was dead, and she was not sure about her father. She wanted to believe that he was still alive. Some very kind women in her barracks took her under their wings and forced her to eat, to wash herself as best she could, and basically kept her alive. They would talk about their home. They would talk about recipes. They would tell jokes. They would remember movies they had seen, anything to have some semblance of humanity. My mother was marched out of Auschwitz before the Russians got there. She ended up in Germany, in Ravensbrück women's camp, then in a place called Malchow, another camp, and then eventually being liberated by the Americans and the British. She spent a long time in an army field hospital recovering. My mother was about 5'6". When she was liberated, she weighed 56 pounds. She was 18 years old. By chance, my mother and a friend of hers who had also survived met these two brothers, and they married. So this is a picture of my mom and dad when they first met in Poland at the end of 1945. And these are some pictures from what we call a DP camp, a displaced persons camp. Now you have to understand that the survivors sometimes had no place to go back to, no home, no family, many of them interrupted education, no money, no way to earn money. So it took a while for them physically, mentally, and emotionally to come back as human beings. And my mother was in this camp in Germany, Feldafing, for a couple of years. My mother is in the second row, the young woman with an armband, a tie and an armband. This is a march in commemoration of their hometown. And in the second picture, my mother meets her first cousin for the first time. My mother was the only survivor of her immediate family and 3 male cousins. Out of 87 relatives, 4 survived. As I said, my grandmother was sending photos of her children to America. So my mother had 2 uncles in America. They were looking for their sister, my grandmother, after the war. Instead, they found their niece. One of them had never seen her, and the other one had left Poland when she was 5 years old. So what they ended up meeting was a young married woman who was about to give birth to a baby. And so they bought an airline ticket for my mother to fly to America, okay, instead of coming on a boat. Most of us would think that was quite luxurious, not if you're 7 months pregnant and, a prop kind of airplane, et cetera. And in fact, when my mother came to the United States, she and my father had not exchanged the papers that she needed, and she was interned at Ellis Island until my great uncles swore out a bond saying that they would be responsible for her. So you can imagine coming to America and basically being thrown into prison. Still, America was the golden land. And as soon as they could, both of my parents became citizens and lived a wonderful life. So I'm going to stop now. I could tell you many more stories about them, about what it was like to come to America, what it was like to become an American, because it's not only just setting foot on the soil, but actually acculturating to a completely different world, speaking English, raising 2 children who know better than you do about what you're supposed to do in America, and actually finding friends, many friends who had also survived the war and who became their social circle. Thank you for listening.
Elaine, thank you so much. Just a very powerful witness, powerful story. Thank you for sharing that with us all, and brings it home in an unreal way. It's hard to imagine, but so powerful. Thank you. I'd like to welcome now Harrisburg's own Rabbi Ariana Koptauber, who from Beth El Temple, who will be leading us in prayer.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. As you heard, I'm Rabbi Ariana Kaptauber from Bethel Temple here in Harrisburg. I'm also the granddaughter of a survivor, and I won't tell that story now, but I just want to say it means a lot to me what you all have organized here today, this memorial. It's been part of my work before I was a rabbi, even in high school and in college, bringing my grandmother around to tell her story. This witnessing means so much to us, to my family, and to all of us as Jews. And I also think in this moment of difficulty and polarization in our country that it means so much to have these interfaith relationships and friendships. I recently wrote an article called Make a Friend Before You Need a Friend. My friend, Reverend Earl Harris, who comes to our synagogue all the time, says that we need to make friends before we might need them. And thinking about both the legacy of horrible times past and fears of the times of today, it's so important and means so much to have these friendships and allyships. And I've so appreciated opportunities to collaborate with the Catholic community, with Father James Leese, and with the diocese, and hearing from you all when things have happened in the Jewish world. So just thank you very much for what you're doing here today. So in memory of the story that we just heard so beautifully and all the victims of the Holocaust, I'll read a traditional Jewish memorial prayer in the Hebrew and then in English. Yizkor Elohim et nishmot kol acheinu b'nei Yisrael shemasru et nafsham al kiddush Hashem ve'et hanashim nashim v'taf shenechenku v'shenisrafu v'shenehergu b'shoah בעבור שאנו מתפללים בעד הזכרות נשמתם, אנא ישמע בחיינו את גבורתם ומסירותם, ויראה במעשינו תואר ליבם, ותחיינה נפשותיהם צרורות בצרור החיים, ותהי מנוחתם כבוד. סוב השמחות את פניך, נעימות בימינך נצח, amen. May God remember the souls of the martyrs of our people who gave their lives for the sanctification of God's name, and the men and women and children who were slaughtered, burned, and killed in the Holocaust. In their memory we pray. May our lives reflect a measure of their bravery, dedication, and purity of soul. May their souls be bound up in the bond of life. May they be remembered with honor, and may they rest in peace at your right hand forever. Amen. One more memorial prayer, and if I could ask you to please rise. El Malach Shochen Bamromim, Hamtzeh Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Shechina, B'malach Kedushim Utarim, Kezar Harakia Mazhirim, Lenishmot Sheshet Milyonei Achiinu V'Achiotenu, Asher Nisfu Bashoah, Shenargu, Veshenishchatu, Veshenechanku, Veshenikrebu Chaim, Veshenisrafu, Vesheunu. Yeladim Uzkenim, Nashim Ugvarim, Morei Drachim, Im B'shuteam, Anshe Amunah V'Torah, Im Mordim V'Cholmim, Hane'ehavim V'hane'imim B'chayehem, Umenotam Lo Nifradu. God, full of mercy, you who dwell in the heights, shelter the victims of the Holocaust beneath the wings of your presence, high among the holy and pure who shine like the brilliant heavens. Shelter them, shelter the souls of our sisters and brothers of the house of Israel who were slaughtered in the Shoah. Small children, women, men, strangled, suffocated, burned to ash. They revered your name, their souls passed into your care. Let Eden be their resting place. Master of mercy, drape them and keep them forever in your protecting presence. Bind their souls to living and to life. God, you are their inheritance. Where they rest, ease them with peace. And we say, Amen. You may be seated. I'll just end by saying that I made it a point this year to go to St. Catherine Labouré. I was invited by Father Lise to celebrate Hanukkah, because very often Jews are called upon to speak about these sad times that we've experienced, and even many of our holidays recall these narratives of they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. But actually there's a lot of joy and beauty in Judaism as well, and there was then and there continues to be now, and so we hope to get together and be in friendship and joyful times as well. Thank you.
Thank you again, Rabbi, and very, very powerful and beautiful remembrance. And I want to thank our presenters once again, Andrew Goretsky, Elaine Culbertson, and also Rabbi Kaptauber as well. And also, again, thank you, Randy Boyette, for being with us. And also, where's Hank Butler? He's hopefully still there. Yeah. I'm very, very grateful for your presence and the support that you really have given to us as the Diocese of Harrisburg, since in a kind of a panicked time, shortly after that incident I alluded to earlier in Hanover, we reached out to first to Hank Butler and to the Jewish Federation, as well as then to the Anti-Defamation League. Your support, your accompaniment of us is something we're very, very grateful for. And this has become, I believe, a moment of ongoing education, as we say in the church, formation. I'm very, very grateful to Dr. Daniel Breen and the staff of the Office for Catholic Education as well, who have collaborated with us also in arranging for this. And this event today. Particularly grateful to all the presidents and principals of our schools and the faculty members who are with us now or who will be seeing this in the days to come. And of course to the students, our beloved students. That's why we have Catholic schools, and Catholic Schools Week is for you, and how much we love you and are so grateful to you and to your families for the sacrifices that you make to have Catholic schools exist. And what we experience today is a very, very important part of Catholic education. Again, it is for you, dear students, and to come to that knowledge and awareness of who we are as Catholics and that importance of our relationship with the Jewish people. And again, thanks to all of the staff here at the Diocesan Center for joining us here in person. Thanks to the Communications Office in particular for your work, and also our technical staff here from Information Services who arranged for this to go so well, and our support staff in the diocese. I've been asked to conclude with a blessing, though it's hard to top the very beautiful words of our of Rabbi, but I will conclude with a blessing, the blessing that God gave to Moses, that he was to instruct Aaron and his sons, as we hear from the book of Numbers in the Hebrew Scriptures. May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. Amen. And go forth to love and to serve the Lord. God bless you.